Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Fit Chicks Chat. My name's Laura Jackson.
And I'm Amanda Quinn.
And on today's episode, we are talking about taking charge of your health in 2025. So we are literally about to head into the new year, which is crazy, like just weeks away from 2025, which, like, we're already a quarter
We
into this century. Like, that's insane to me.
It's so insane too to think like every year I feel like we always say like, oh my God, the year went by so fast. But like
This year went by fast.
this year was like the fast. This was like the speed year of all years, in my opinion, because I was just like, you blink and it's done every single month. I'm like, what? What? Where did the time go? It's so crazy. But yeah, we're about to get into 25, which is amazing.
I know, and I think this conversation is going to be a little bit different, though. It's not going to be so much, we're not going to be talking about what habits to focus on and all this stuff. We're going to talk a little bit more about why it's so important that we start to really pay attention to our health. And whether you're a coach or whether you listen to this podcast for yourself, I think that this is one of these really important conversations because I've been really excited to see that, over the last month or so, we're having so much more conversation around what is going on with our current food systems and what is going on with, the health of our world. Whereas, we talk a lot about weight loss, but really at the core of what we talk about too, right, is about living your healthiest, best version of yourself. Because everything you learned from this podcast, everything we teach our certifications is not just about that result. It's about getting to the root cause, which again will make you, healthier for the long term and be able to do this for life. So I think this is a really interesting conversation. And I think it's a different perspective to be able to have with your clients or see your health journey a little bit different as we're heading into this new year.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think it's really looking at not just like your own health, but looking at the industry as a whole and like
Mhm.
looking at all of the different impacts that the industry is having on your health that are things that feel like they're out of your control, but we can pull them back into control. And I think that that's like a thing that we're going to talk about today that's so important to reframe in our minds.
Well, and the thing that's really interesting is so I've been in holistic health for a lot of years, like I don't even know how many now, but
A hundred
these are
years.
yeah, these are the conversations that we have been having, you know, since 2000. Like, and it's funny because, like, to me, people talking about this now, for example, like the dye in our cereals or, different food additives or the way our food is engineered, which we're going to talk about today, that's the stuff that we've been talking about for so long. But our industry of holistic, quote unquote, holistic health, a lot of people called it kind of wacko, or it was like, yeah, these are all the kind of hippy
The
dippy, or this
granola.
is,
Yeah.
it's granola. It's like, it wasn't taken seriously. And I think because of especially over the last couple of years, we've seen such a huge explosion in obesity, in diabetes, in pre-diabetes, in metabolic disorders, insulin resistance, chronic illnesses, right? Like these things have really started to skyrocket, and our healthcare system can't handle it. Not
Mhm.
only that, so many people are just tired. They're feeling like, why is it that I feel like such crap all the time? You know what I mean? And it's for so long, again, people, when they would focus on their nutrition, it was usually for a specific goal. And then as we're seeing this huge explosion of all these health related issues, so many people who are in healthcare don't understand the nutrition part of it, right? So their response is to, take more medication or, look deeper into certain symptoms. Whereas if we could start to change some of the lifestyle, and I think a lot of people are getting excited about, hey, like, what's my part in this? If we can take more part in the lifestyle of it, then we can actually change the root cause of it or contribute to healing the problem, right? So I think a
Mhm.
lot of people after the pandemic, especially, really started to pay attention to this and really started to say, you know what? I think there's something else going on here. I think there's something else that should be a part of this conversation. And it's not just about going to my doctor's office, which we have nothing against doctors. Like, again, this is what a lot of people like to do. They like to pit like holistic healthcare against, you know, mainstream, um, the mainstream medical field, and they shouldn't. They should live together, right? There's a purpose for both. But yeah, just seeing it's like we're getting a little bit more curious about this conversation, which is why I like to have this because I think there's a lot of people out there who are like, wait, this isn't making sense. Why is it that we're spending more money on healthcare, but we have more disease and more obesity, right? Why is it that these
right?
things don't make sense?
And why is it that it's, when I eat certain ways or I do certain things that quote unquote I should be doing to help my health be better, it's not working anymore? Like, why is it that I'm eating certain foods and I'm noticing a difference? Or why is it that when I, follow a certain diet or a plan or anything like that, it just doesn't seem to really be resonating with my body anymore? What is it that's in our foods or in our environments that could potentially be causing this? Because if I feel like I'm quote unquote doing everything right and nothing is moving the needle or nothing is changing in my overall health or well-being, and I'm feeling tired all the time or I'm feeling bad all the time or I'm feeling nauseous or any of those things, what else could it be?
Well, and I also think one of the big things too, for me, I always have questioned like, why is it that every time I go to the doctor for something, whether it be something like during pregnancy or I just recently had a surgery. Why is there no conversation around nutrition? Why is that not included
Right.
in the conversation? Because nutrition is, we all have to eat. Like it's different about us avoiding certain, toxins or certain products that could cause inflammation. But all of us have to eat. And if we're not looking at what we are putting in our bodies every single day, especially when it comes to different health conditions, they could be hindering our progress or hindering our success, but the conversation is never there. And I always have questioned that. I'm like, why is it not like nutrition? It contributes so much to inflammation in our body if we're eating the wrong foods, right? And so many health conditions are tied in with inflammation. And it's like, I just have always questioned that. So I think the first thing I think is really important to understand is how our food is currently made, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is what has really contributed to the decline of our health is the change in the way that our food has been produced. So
Mm-hmm.
back in the day, right, we didn't have food scientists and we didn't create foods in labs and in boxes. We got it from nature,
Right.
right? It was what grew, like things that grew in the ground or, animals that ran
Trees.
or birds that flew, whatever, right? It was something that was living at some point. And then kind of fast forward, and it happened after like World War II, we started looking at creating more processed foods. And then this is what's really interesting too. A lot of the food scientists that they actually have creating food, they took from the cigarette industry. After
Right.
cigarettes went from being healthy, they were actually marketed as healthy by and approved by doctors at times to being seen as unhealthy. So this food became engineered, and it was engineered in a very specific way. And it was engineered so it was the perfect combination of sugar, of fat, and of salt. And what this does, guys, this is the stuff that a lot of us don't realize, which is why when we eat these foods, we think, why can't I say no to these foods? Why do I love these foods so much? Because they are actually produced by scientists to be super, super palatable, which means they taste amazing. And they also trigger our brain's reward system, which reinforces this is something good, do it again, do it again, do it again. It also overrides all of our feelings of fullness and it makes it nearly impossible to stop eating these foods. Like how many times have you
Yeah.
eaten something like think of chips and you're like, oh, I can't just eat one, right?
Right.
Whereas you could
Well, did you
probably
ever see
eat
that?
one
Did you ever
strawberry.
see that that there was like a challenge, it was like a commercial, and I don't know if it played across North America or whatnot, but there was a commercial about one of those, like one chip brand, and they were doing this whole thing of like, oh, well, if you ate just one, then you would have won $1 million or something. But they had all these actors
Yeah.
in like in a studio, right? And they were like, people would sit and then they would try one, then they'd be like, oh, and then they would eat more and more and more. And they were like, oh, the whole thing was if you only ate one, we would have given you $1 million. But they weren't aware of that as like being the reward. But it was like just proving to them like, oh, once you eat one, you can't stop. But it's like, but it also, yeah, it also solidifies the idea that it's like, yes, these are actually like they're created to be addictive foods. They're created to create like to make your body go, I need more of this. I need more of this. Like, and so I don't know. I just thought it was a really interesting commercial. It was a really interesting take on it because I'm like, you're kind of reinforcing the idea that yes, we can eat just one, but you're not, but you're also reinforcing the idea that like you've made it that way.
Well, and I was listening also, I was watching a documentary And I can't remember the name of it, but this guy was interviewing a food scientist, and they were saying how they have to have a minimum amount of sugar. They figured out the actual quote unquote sweet spot of what how much sugar makes things sell more. So they are required to put that amount of sugar in those foods because they know that anything that has that sweet level or that combination of sweetness with fat and salt, those are the ones that will sell the most. So it's very interesting because
It's
also
scary.
it is scary. It is scary. And this
It
is something
is.
that, we've kind of pushed aside for so many years in the conversation that food has not been an issue. Like these are not actual foods. The cereal in the cereal aisle, that's not food. That is food-like products. That is, it
Mhm.
contains ingredients, but it's not actual food, right? So even changing that thought around what it is, and we've talked about that a lot on this podcast, but
It's actually
like
one of my
it's not,
favorite statements is food-like products because I think about that all the time. I think about that when I'm looking at food and stuff and I'm looking
yeah.
at things in the grocery. I'm like, it's not really it isn't really actually meant to be food, whatever this is.
It's Frankenfood. It's like, yeah, we're mixing
Yeah.
together corn and soy and, high fructose corn syrup and all of these things to create a granola bar that has oats. That's the only thing that's real in it, but the rest of it is all of this extra stuff, right? And
Hmm.
it's scary because again, it boils down to what we think is normal because we like, especially our generation now, or our kids' generation, they have grown up thinking that those are foods, right? So even for us, I know for you, you had a lot of canned foods in the house, but like for me, my mom,
Yes.
even though she did use some like convenience products, she still made dinner all the time, right? Like it was still like she cooked food, and also the foods that exist now didn't exist then. Like one of the things that always drives me, it definitely triggers me somewhat, is when people say to me, "Well, I grew up on that and I'm fine." And I'm like, "Well,
Oh yeah. It's
number one,
different.
are you?" Because we can't see what's going on behind under the surface. But number two, it's also like that food, that version of it that lived back then is probably not the same version as it is now. And it definitely is different depending on what country you live in, because in the US versus Canada versus Europe, we have different food laws. So there's certain things that are not legal in Canada that will be in the US to put in our foods,
Hmm.
which is crazy to me. How can it be illegal in one country to put something in food, but it's legal in another? Like if you found that it's
Well,
poisonous to the well-being, why is it included in food?
I remember having a conversation with a friend of ours who lives in Sweden, and she was sharing that whenever she travels to North America, she's always shocked by all of the different foods because where she lives, it's generally everyone just generally lives a healthier lifestyle. They just, they cook at home, they eat fresh foods, they move. It's just sort of the lifestyle in that area that she lives in. And she says, I'm always surprised because when I travel, I find it very challenging to find food that's actual food that I'm even familiar with. And it's
Yeah.
not about it being like cultural foods. It's really just because everything, when she travels to North America, majority of the foods at like airports and things like that are all just processed packaged stuff. And she's like, I find it so hard to find anything. And so we were chatting a lot about that. And I was like, one of the things that Laura does, because I don't like eggs, is she always buys those like at least the hard boiled eggs. She's like, oh, good call. But it was just this idea that it's like, there's not a lot of options when but it's so different. It's so different across the world because she's like, I don't understand half of the stuff that are presented as food in North America. I don't even know what it is. I've never seen it before and I wouldn't imagine ever eating it,
Well,
which
and
I thought
that's
was really
why it's
interesting.
like understanding because, we're such big believers in not just telling people, oh, you should do this. It's like learn the why, because I find it so much
Yeah.
easier to do something when you know how, like, why it's important and how it works, right? Like, we're not talked like openly, even in our food guides, our Canada's food guide, US food guide. Like, if you look at what the recommendations are, those were basically funded and reinforced by certain industries like agriculture. And what does agriculture want you to eat? More grain, more soy, more corn, more of those things, right?
Yeah.
Because they produce it. So it's like, it's always kind of when you start to trail back to where things come from, it's like, how did that even come to be? And it's not about being even conspiracy theorists or things like this, but it's just to openly question. But that's where we're following our instruction from, right? And then it's not told to us like, oh, these are not like something that comes in a box that never lived probably does not have the most nutrition for us, probably is not as beneficial. We just think, oh yeah, I got, bear paws or whatever. It tastes good.
Multigrain. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's low sugar or it's multigrain. Yeah.
exactly. So the
Definitely.
thing is,
I find that
these
with
food,
this, I always like use cereals for those examples because cereals are like the biggest, I feel like they're one of the biggest culprits when it comes to like marketing and messaging and hidden stuff because they have all of the things, like all the kids' cereals and stuff. And it's like they've got all the bad dyes and the sugars and all that stuff, but then they're marketed as multigrain. Hey, I remember seeing a box once that said, "Hey, mom and dad, this is good for you." And it was literally like a little like bubble, like a thought bubble kind of thing on the box. And I was like, what? Like
well,
this is
and
crazy. And it
even
was like
now,
Lucky
like,
Charms because it's now multigrain or something. And I was like, that's crazy.
well, I heard this term called health halos, which I thought was really interesting. It's like this way of looking like angelic, like this food product is angelic. So there's certain words, and if you actually look and read into how food labeling actually works, which we're not going to get into today, but like the criteria to label something as organic or as sugar-free or low fat or whatever it is, they're loose. And again, they're different in every single country. Or natural. Like natural could be it has to contain up to X amount of natural
It's just like
ingredients. It doesn't mean the whole thing
percentages.
is natural. Yeah. So it's like
Yeah.
there's things that like we're just it's very confusing. So I could see how for the average person who's like, oh, I'm trying to make healthier choices and I'm going to get these organic cookies. Well, just because the flour that was in that came from an organic farm, all of the other things that in there don't necessarily have to be organic. And then it's also a highly processed food that's packed full of sugar, right? So
Exactly.
it's just like
It's all they just trick you. They trick you. They're so
it's
tricky,
so much
those marketers.
manipulation. It's so much
Totally.
manipulation. And it's also to do with too, you know what else? It's interesting. This is something else. A lot of food companies, they will use unrealistic serving sizes. So for example, like have you ever read that on, was it like I can't remember even if it was almonds, but like even on chips, it's like 11 chips in a serving.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
again, most people don't eat 11 chips in a serving. Or like even on
No,
a
most
chocolate
people
bar.
eat like half a bag or whatever, or like a
Yeah.
whole bag maybe in a sitting. Like if they're literally like, okay, I'm going in on this. I'm eating these chips. It's like you wouldn't put like in a separate bowl, like here's my 11, here's my serving, like most people, right? Or
Well,
like
even a
ice cream. I think
protein
ice cream is
bar.
actually one of the worst ones too. Ice
Yeah,
cream is
half a
usually
cup,
like, yeah,
half a
it's
cup.
like this much.
Yeah. And then also, like, even with had a protein bar and it was like, looking at the protein bar, I'm like, oh, this is actually, pretty low in sugar, like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking and then I'm like, wait a second, actually, this is two servings in this bar, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, again, a way to trick you into buying it, like, and thinking it is a healthier or a lower sugar, lower salt, lower fat, lower processed food. So it's just,
Hmm.
and the other thing too, like this is something that's so interesting. It's the idea of fortified foods. So when we fortify something, it means that we add it into our foods. So like if you see fortified with vitamin D, it means there's been vitamin D added into that food. It didn't naturally have it, it was
Yes.
added in.
Hmm.
But the thing is, a lot of like cereals again, or like granola bars or box things, will say that because it makes it again sound like it's healthier because it's fortified with
It gives
vitamin
it the
D.
health halo. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing that's really interesting too is when we have certain food sources that are synthetic versus from their natural form. So, for example, a food that would be high in vitamin D, if we have it in this synthetic form, it's not as available for our body to utilize. So, even though we're getting the vitamin D, we can't process it the same way as if we got it from a real whole food.
Mhm.
So it's like it's just so hard. But I mean, there are some benefits to this, like when we talk about this at the end of how to turn it around. But it's just really, really hard. And the other thing too, and we talk about this a lot in the holistic nutrition weight loss coach certification. And we recently actually just did a whole section on it on in our holistic nutrition and health coaches club, which is our monthly club. We did all of our coaching materials were around it, but it was around understanding calories because
Mhm.
A lot of these foods too, right? They're very calorically dense, but they're empty calories. So that means your body's getting a lot of energy, but it's not getting value from that energy. So you're getting energy,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have the vitamins and the minerals to support your body. It doesn't have the protein to support your muscle mass. It doesn't have, the fiber for digestion. It doesn't have healthy fats for hormonal balance. So two people could be eating the exact same amount of calories, but one of them is starving from the inside because they actually are
Yeah,
not getting any nutrition, even though they're getting enough food.
I
And
know.
that is
It's so
something that is
fascinating. Mhm.
such a big perspective shift, right? It's like filling your gas tank up with with dirt and expecting your car to drive. Your gas tank is full, it's got something in there, but it's not working, right? Whereas if you use like high quality fuel, it's going to run, your car's going to last longer.
Mhm.
But we don't think about it that
I
way.
always No, it's so weird. I always think about things like whenever I'm eating something that's like, we always talk about like nutritionally dense versus not so nutritionally dense foods. And I always think if I'm going to eat something that's like not so nutritionally dense, I'm always like, it's literally like I'm eating like, I may as well just be having like an empty bowl of calories because there's nothing in here that is actually sustainable for my body. Like there's nothing that I'm not getting anything. The only thing I'm getting out of this is maybe a pleasure receptor. I'm not actually getting anything that's going to like feed my body in any way. There's no nutrition in here. And as long as I'm okay with that decision, I'm okay with that decision in that moment. But it's it's like recognizing those two things, but it takes time to recognize that. It's like it's not something that's so easy because again, the way that they market it, the way that they message it is not very clear. You think, oh, it's fiber and there's vitamin D in here and it's multigrain, so this is good for
Yeah.
me.
Well, and
And
it's
it's
just
just
really
it's
hard
literally like
too.
eating an empty bowl of calories.
Yeah, and it's hard too because we haven't yet, as a society, connected the dots between our food and how we feel and also our health. So, because it hasn't been a mainstream conversation, right? Like,
Mhm.
even these things, like, again, we've been talking about this behind the scenes for so long, but if you go to a doctor, even for mental health issues, are they even asking you what you're eating? Probably not.
No, completely.
They're going to probably give you a medication. They're going to talk to you about going to therapy. But again, it's a holistic approach. Those things can also support it, but then you also have to focus on the nutrition too. So many mental health issues are tied into nutrition because our nutrition obviously feeds our serotonin and all of our neurotransmitters and all the things that are involved in how we feel. Like it's so tied together, and it just that's why I love what we do, and I feel like again, some people have come into our world because they want to lose a few pounds, or some people have come into our world because they want to, you know, build muscle or whatever it is. And they might want it for a vanity perspective. That's how I ended up in this industry, right? I wanted to look better. I want to lose weight.
Mhm.
But then as they realize what they learn and what we're seeing and how it all comes together, it's like, oh my gosh, like it changes everything. So it's just
Mhm.
I think that the more this becomes a mainstream conversation, the more people are going to start to demand more from these food companies and start to change their selections and what we focus on and do it for a different reason other than just weight loss. And I love weight loss, don't get me wrong, but there's so much more to it. Because the thing we have to remember, right, is that these food companies are successful because basically what they do is they create repeat customers, right?
Mhm.
People get hooked on these foods. And some people go all the way to like real food addiction, which is, the extreme. But either way, it's like as you love the taste of these foods, they bring you pleasure, you get a dopamine hit, but also, they're causing your blood sugar to be imbalanced. So you're having those spikes, highs and lows, and you're getting addicted, right? And that creates repeat customers. And the best repeat customers is getting them from when they're kids, right? Which is why so much
True.
marketing, which should not be legal, in my opinion, is to children. Like making everything fun
Mhm.
and toys and all of this stuff. It's like, to me, that has nothing to do with food. That should not go hand in hand. But it's a profitable industry. There's a lot of money made in the food industry. And
Of
they will
course.
fight tooth and nail to say that all the health issues have nothing to do with them. It's a choice. People can choose these foods. But when they're made so addictive and they're made so available and they're marketed so well, how can people say no?
Completely. And I think, and it's also even like, think about placement in grocery stores, right? Like it's
Mhm.
proven that the shelves that are like in the cereal aisle, again, I'll stick on cereal, that like in that aisle, We have a friend of ours who does like placement in grocery stores and things like that. Like he works with products and brands to put them into actual stores. And he was saying, like the cereal aisle, it's like the middle shelf is the shelf that is like the top, like you spend the most
A
money
hot
to be able to
spot.
be on that shelf. It is. It's like the hot spot because it is at eye level for kids. So any cereals that are like, the Lucky Charms and that kind of stuff, the stuff that like the kids are really gonna want, they're all in the middle. Like if you've ever noticed, it's always like, the oat bran and things like that, they're on the top shelf, right? No one's looking up
Yeah.
there. And on the bottom is usually some other kid stuff, but maybe not as popular. But it's like
Or
the
the
middle
family size
shelf, that
versions of all of the stuff in the
correct.
middle.
Correct, but the middle is like that is the prime spot, and the end caps are like huge too because the end caps, everybody walks by them, they see it and they're like, "Oh, look, the trick cereal is here and they're offering it for $2 off. Amazing. I'm going to buy this because it's multigrain. My kids will like it. They'll eat it and I feel like I'm doing something good." And it's not your fault. And I think that's the other message is it's just like it's
Yeah.
not your fault if like you're listening to this right now and you think like, "Man, I've done that so many times. I've bought that cereal thinking at least it's multigrain, so I'm doing something good." Like, just know it's not your fault. You're just being tricked. Like, it's just really good marketers and really big companies with big marketing dollars and spends to be able to try to get you convinced that this is a good opportunity for you.
And really
And that's why we're
addictive
doing this
foods.
conversation. Yeah.
Well,
And get you
and
addicted, get your kids addicted, get like, you know, get everybody in your household on board to thinking, well, I need that. I need that in my house. I need that in my life. I want that thing, right?
it's
And it's
convenient.
just
It has long
totally
shelf lives, like, and there's nothing, and I mean, there's a lot of people, especially in today's economy, that unfortunately, too, food is just even more expensive than ever. So, like, what
totally.
are the cheapest foods? The lowest nutritionally dense foods, which is
Hmm.
hard. So it's still, how I always like to include in everything that we create more affordable options, like what could be the most nutritionally dense affordable option. So,
Hmm.
things like canned beans and canned fish, and even if you get like powdered milk, you can make your own almond flour. Like there's so many things you can do, make your own like certain things, but it's still challenging, right? And it's hard because that is that, class disparity where people who have more money have more access to fresh foods, right?
Yeah.
So, but I do think, and this is something I have lived by and I stand by, is that even though our health and what we're going through is not our fault, it is our responsibility. It's our
Mhm.
responsibility to be invested in understanding our health, invested in understanding what these food companies are doing. Because it's so easy to be like, well, I didn't know this, or, this has nothing to do with me. It does. Every time you eat, you are voting with your dollars, right? You're supporting a certain food company. You're also supporting a certain or taking away from your health. So I love that statement because it's like, yeah, it's not our fault. We live in this world, but it is our responsibility to lead it. And that gives us our power back, which is the whole purpose of this conversation, right? Like, take your power back, take back being in charge of your health. So, how do we do that without getting overwhelmed? Because it's like all this doom and gloom, but it's not actually that hard, right? So, one of the first things that I want to say, I think, is we've got to get out of this mindset of wanting everything to be so convenient,
Hmm.
right? Like, everyone, we want things easier, easier, easier. Like, why can't
We
we
want it
have
easier. We
things
want it faster. We want
faster?
it like
Like,
just like grab and go. And sometimes you need that. And I get that. I do.
totally.
But we want that all the time. And I think it's just the way that society's about like look at even social media, the way it's like people's attention span. They say it's as short as a goldfish, right? Like our
Yeah,
attention spans now when we're on social media is literally the same attention span as a goldfish. And you see goldfish in like a tank. They're just like zipping and zooming across the tanks, right? They're going back and forth, and that's the same as our attention span when we're on social media. So when we think about that, it's like, how can we then put our focus back into our health? How can we, like, that's why we've been conditioned to be so like, I need instant gratification. I need things fast. I need things fast. I need things fast. How can we slow things down and build a different process for ourselves and for our families?
totally. And just making the decision, like, I'm going to be more invested in and more conscious about what I'm putting into my body and into my home.
Hmm.
Like that first step. And then also knowing that that is going to take some time to invest. I always say to our students, weight loss is a skill. Nutrition is a skill. It's something you have to learn. If you've never done it before, it's not going to feel second nature at first. If you're used to grabbing the convenience foods and now you're like, okay, I'm going to start getting involved in my nutrition, it's not second nature, but it will become that once you practice it, right? But it's that
Mhm.
first bit where you have to be like, okay, I'm making this decision to change and I'm going to invest some time into learning about this and how to fuel my body. The second
Yeah.
thing, the simplest thing that you could do is just start cooking at home from
Yes.
real whole foods. So, like,
Hmm.
foods without labels, which is like the fruit, the vegetables, the bakery
The
stuff.
meats.
Yeah, like
Hmm.
the stuff that is around the perimeter of
Yeah.
the grocery store. Dried oats, dried quinoa, dried barley, dried, all of those things are more in the middle aisles, but those are still one single ingredient on the ingredient label or no label at all. The less
Hmm.
processed, the better.
Yeah, I know it's interesting. If you start thinking about, okay, the foods that I'm going to eat are going to be foods that are one ingredient foods, if that becomes kind of like a bit of a rule where it's like, okay, every meal I make is based on one ingredient, then it's like it takes away the like confusion around it because then you're like, okay, what's this? It's a pepper, it's chicken, it's um, you know, whatever, cucumbers. It's all like just one ingredient because it's literally just one thing. It's a whole food. And that's kind of how when I was trying to teach my husband about this and I was trying to talk to him about that, that's what I was like. I was like, does it have just like, is it one thing? If it's one
Yeah.
thing, it's good. That's the best way to think about it. Like, and I found that was the simplest way to educate somebody who was trying to learn to eat healthier and be better. That was actually my simplest way of explaining it.
Well, and it really is, a lot of people we talk so much about reading labels, but if you could take that whole stress out of reading labels if you just have stuff that's one ingredient or you know what I mean? Like with the least amount of additives. And if you can't pronounce it, then you probably shouldn't eat it, right? Like if it's like, this big long chemical name, it's like, well, what is that in this rice
Yeah.
or whatever it is, right? Like those are things that are added in to make things taste good. And they're also really hard in our
Those are the
system.
scientists, the food scientists, just dropping that in there for you. The
Yeah.
dextrose, whatever. Those
It's
are
crazy.
only scientists know really what that is. So if you're not a food scientist, then don't eat it.
Yeah, and another thing too is like, there's like the war on carbs and everyone is against bread and whatever. But it's also like if you're going to buy bread, just buy it from the bakery as opposed to that's baked at the bakery as opposed from buying it in a plastic Wonder Bread bag that's can live on the shelf for 3 months. Like how does bread, if you buy it from the bakery, it's only good for a couple of days, right? And of course,
Yeah.
then if you want to go deeper into it, you can start to grow your own vegetables and make your own food. But that is like a lot for a lot of us, right? Like we're so busy. But
Yeah.
it's just,
I have this dream of doing that. Do you?
me
I
too.
literally have this dream of like, I'm gonna have this garden and it's gonna be glorious and I'm gonna grow
Well,
all
I
these
tried this
things. And
summer.
I haven't done it yet. But I
Yeah, I
do
tried
want
this
to
summer.
do it. I do want to like, yeah.
I got 5 tomatoes
Did
and
you
one
get
butternut
anything?
squash, and I was so excited. Out of all the things I
And I bet you
planted,
they tasted delicious. I bet you they were delicious.
they were. And like
Yeah.
it's also too because we don't go too much into it, but it's also even like the soil that things are grown in. Like that helps our
Mhm.
gut health. And so if we can grow things, or if you have a farmer's market, and again, it doesn't need to be like a big fancy, like you might live by a farm. I actually do, which is great. So I have people who like they just have a sign, eggs for sale. So there's just things that but then it's like I think that that's what takes a lot of people away and makes people nervous about focusing on this or learning about this because I know this is for me and you. Like we're not those super holistic people and I don't want to generalize, but like when I went to holistic nutrition school, it's like everyone
Mhm.
there was the same, right? Like everyone was a vegan, everyone ate like everything was raw or macro balanced. Everyone drank filtered water. Everyone grew their own stuff. They like had their own beehive. It was like to the extreme. And I'm like, oh my God, like that is not me. So I think this is one of the things that you and I are both really passionate about is like making that kind of this mindset more available to everyday people because you don't have to go to this extreme nature, right? But it's becoming aware and being like, okay, I'm just going to start to cook real food at home. I'm not going to buy as much processed and packaged food. I'm going to shop the perimeter. I need to try to buy
And
locally if I can. And I'm
mhm,
going to educate myself, which is the last thing that I think is the most and the most important. You've got to start to educate yourself and educate yourself about
I
how
agree.
food interacts with your body. Again, we've got our certifications. We have some lower cost courses too. We do a lot of free events as well. So you can check all that out at fitchexacademy.com. We have some amazing programs. Our next holistic weight loss coach certification starts in February, so February 10th, um, which I'm really excited about. But learning how food interacts with your body. As you start to learn this, you're like, I don't want to put that in my body. It's like I look at my son, and it's funny, there's still things that I will eat that I feel guilty giving to him. Because even though I'm
Sure.
like, it tastes good for him, I'm like, would I give my kid one cigarette and be like, well, it's one cigarette, it's not going to kill you? I would be judged beyond,
Yeah.
right? But I'm like, oh, here is like a red dyed candy that's packed full of sugar and chemicals and I'm going to give that to you, but it's just one. It's not going to kill you. Like, I'm like, oh, like I have this ongoing battle with that because he
Mhm.
will eat those
You
foods, and I
know,
don't want him to have a bad relationship with food or whatever food like products. And the majority of what he eats is really, but I'm like, it's just interesting to me because I'm still like, why am I giving this to him if I know this is not serving him? Like, why? Like, it's that's the whole society we live in, right? But I just think
I know.
understanding how what happens to your body, because all I'm thinking is, oh my gosh, he's about to have a blood sugar spike. He's about to go ballistic because
Yeah.
like his sugar is about to go like crazy high. And it's funny because you could see it more managed in adults, but in kids, it's like when they eat something sugary, you see the real
It's
reaction to sugar.
instant and it's instant. I still remember the very first time that my daughter had chocolate milk. It wasn't at my house. It was at someone else's house and I wasn't there. And apparently she just ran around the room going ring, 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 like that, like literally making that noise, like as if she was like on, like revved up, ready to like run through the walls kind of thing. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh. I'm like, and they thought it was funny. And I'm like, okay, it might be amusing in the moment, but at the same time, if you think about what that's doing to her, and it's like, oh my gosh, like if she feels that energy, it's like making her insides feel like they're like going through like a tornado. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not great. Because we were
Well, and
always
you
really
think
careful about not
that's,
giving her those things for so
but that's with
long.
a small child, right? Like, and I always believe in the
Yeah.
80/20 rule, right? So you're not, feeling guilty about stuff, but you have to be doing the good things the majority of the time to get the benefits from it, right? But it's
Yeah.
like you think about that in an adult who has been eating that way for 40 years, right? And their
Hmm.
body is starving from the inside and their hormones, they don't know what it feels like to feel really good. Like, and that's one of the things I always hear from students or from like when we had clients and stuff would always be like, oh my gosh, I wish I knew how good I would feel like
I
when, like back
know.
then. And it's like, that's the only way to know how good you're going to feel is to do it, right? The hardest part is to start doing it. So
It's
hopefully that
so true
this,
though. That's such a
yeah,
like, sorry, I just want to add like that's such a like huge like mind shift, I think, is because we don't know what we don't know. And it's
no,
like this idea of like you're going through every day and you're like, oh, I have that 3 o'clock slump and I feel kind of bad and I feel really tired at night and I have these cravings for chocolate every night at this time and I everything is like clockwork, but you think that this is just my normal state. This is just who I am. And then all of a sudden when you just start recognizing, you're like, hey, wait a second, I'm just gonna like make some shifts and changes. And then all of a sudden those things change and you're like, wait a second, I don't feel tired. I have energy and I don't have those peaks and valleys. And I don't feel like that brain fog or that like this or that like, and all of a sudden you just start seeing those shifts. It is life
it's
changing.
life changing.
It is life changing. And I promise you it's worth it. Because when you do those changes, it's like when I stopped smoking cigarettes, right? It's like I smoked cigarettes for so long and that was the habit that I did. This is like back when we were teenagers and I did all this stuff. And then when I stopped, it was hard at first because I was like, oh, I want the thing because I'm addicted to the thing and I want the thing. But then all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I can breathe better. I can run for longer. I can I can smell things differently. Like all of the things, I can taste things in a different way. It changes your life
Yeah.
and it doesn't own you anymore. And I think that that's the other big thing too, is that when you can actually break free from some of those addictions or food addictions or things, if you are listening and you have any of those or you help your clients with that, it gives you a freedom of choice as opposed to feeling like I need that chocolate. I need this thing. I need this in my life. And if I don't have it, then I feel like I feel unsettled, right? You need to be able to help people through that. So sorry, I had to add that like little tirade in, but I think it's so important to know that. Like it's so freeing and it's so
Well,
life-changing.
and just how physically good you feel, how it
Yeah.
impacts everything. Like that's,
Yeah.
that's a thing. And it's at first, I created some other materials, some coaching materials in the academy all about this too, around addiction, sugar addiction. But like at first, it feels terrible to start switching over to this way because your body is like shifting gears. It's like, what are you doing to me? We had all
Yeah.
this, hyper palatable food that like
I
triggered
thought we
all
were
of
good.
dopamine receptors by, yeah, like my physically, I'm craving this stuff, right? Because my insulin, my ghrelin, my leptin's all out of whack. And then after about a week, you start to settle into feeling better. And then that's when, again, you're like, okay, maybe I could stick with this. But a lot of times we can't get past that first point. I know for me, even when I was binge eating, like, and that's the thing too, like, we don't realize how easy it is. These foods are constructed to be able to eat endless amounts of calories. I can eat 10,000 to 20,000 calories in a sitting because they don't fill you up. They have no fiber, they have no healthy fats, they have no protein. A lot of them are just highly processed refined carbohydrates with lots of sugar, right? So they don't fill up
Mhm.
your stomach and they mess with your body. Your body doesn't know when it's full, which is why so many of us are obese. And, it's just, it has to stop. Like it's not fair to our society. And the unfortunate thing though is no one's going to come and stop it for you. You're going to be the one who has to make the decision because these food industries are not changing anytime soon, but they will change based on people changing their behaviors. So if there's no one buying those foods anymore and there's no one, constantly consuming these things, they're going to have to look at the way things are produced. So it starts with you just making a decision to remove yourself from that, learn about it, change what you do, and then it does have a ripple effect, right? Like one of the things I think so much is I try to live my life by leading by example. I'm not going to ask someone to do something I'm not willing to do myself. So I'm not going to ask someone to, you know what I mean? Like eat a certain way if I'm not eating that way in my real life. I'm not going to ask someone to focus on their health if I'm not focusing on my health. So it's just
Mhm.
as you start to change you, then your family will start to change, and then your community will change, and it will keep on having that ripple effect, right? And then the world will just become a healthier place. So that is the end of our podcast today. Hopefully, we didn't scare you guys too much, but just this is your year, whether you are first listening to this or you're a coach and you're like, no, I want to start to help my clients really change this. Let's make 2025 the year that we stop putting it off and we reclaim our health. We take control. We get to decide. We get to take those small steps. But let's stop, letting the food companies run us. Let's stop focusing on these flashy trends or, whatever the latest diet is that usually is somehow combined with highly processed foods too. That was really true in the 80s, but just start to make those decisions and learn for ourselves and make better choices and not be perfect, but keep on heading in that direction. So, hopefully, this was helpful to you guys. And of course, you could check out any of our upcoming certifications. We have our new ones that are posted on our website for 2025. We have some live cohorts that are going on, which is going to be super fun. So, go check it out, fitchexacademy.com, and we hope to see you guys soon. We'll talk to you later or next week.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.